Welcome to the PDB Situation Report. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. Let's get briefed. We'll start things off by taking a look at U.S. efforts to bolster Ukraine's air defenses amid the ongoing Russian invasion, potentially, and this is interesting, with help from Israel. We'll be joined by intelligence analyst Ryan McBeth for insight into that story. A little later, we're starting to see some of the real-world fallout from the U.S.'s disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. You remember that. As new reports suggest that the White House, get this, may be turning to the Taliban to help combat ISIS. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer stops by to give his take on that. But first, the Situation Report spotlight. One of the biggest problems that Ukraine has faced since the Russian invasion is defending its airspace against Russian missiles and aircraft. We've talked about that on the PDB. But it may be on the verge of getting a major boost in the coming weeks, potentially with the help from Israel. According to an exclusive Financial Times report, the U.S. and Israel are discussing sending up to 8 Patriot air defense systems currently on loan to Israel to Ukraine. Now, this move could triple Kyiv's air defense arsenal. Israel has had these Patriot batteries for roughly 30 years and announced in April that they would be retiring them in favor of advanced technology. U.S. officials saw an opportunity and initiated talks to transfer the batteries to Ukraine. Now, Kyiv has been pleading for more air defense systems to defend against Russia's relentless aerial bombardments. Currently, Ukraine has only 4 Patriot batteries, and 2 of those are on loan from European allies. Patriot systems are scarce and costly, with each battery priced at around roughly $1 billion. That's with a B, depending on if you get the luxury package, the car mats, and the cup holders, and missiles at $4 million each. Now, if Ukraine acquires the 8 retired batteries from Israel, it would significantly enhance the air defense capabilities, dealing potentially a major blow to the Russian military and helping protect Ukrainian cities and infrastructure from the aerial attacks. Of course, as you might imagine, Putin and Russia, well, they're not too happy with the development, and they're now warning Israel of political consequences should the transfer of these systems be realized. For more insight into this story and Ukraine's efforts to defend its skies, I want to bring in Ryan McBeth. He's a cybersecurity expert and software engineer who works in the field of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And you can find his work on Substack at ryanmcbeth.substack.com. Ryan, thanks very much for joining us here on the PDB Situation Report.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I can't wait to talk to you about air defense.
You'll think differently once you start talking to me. But here, let's start at the 30,000-foot level, since we're talking air defenses. You see what I did there. Discuss, if you could, again, sort of top line, the importance of the defense systems, and particularly the Patriot system, for Kyiv, not just going forward, but what has been the status coming up to this point in time?
As of right now, Ukraine is under tremendous pressure from Russia, especially in the realm of glide bombs, which are essentially what they sound like. They're bombs that are dropped from over Russia that glide usually to the city of Kharkiv and explode there, causing massive, massive damage. And there just aren't enough.
What sort of, if I could...
Yeah.
If I could interrupt, Ryan, I'm sorry, I have a bad habit of doing that, but the glide bombs, for our listeners, what sort of range do they have, and who makes them?
So they're made by Russia. The specific company actually slips my mind for right now, but they're traditional Fab 500 bombs. These bombs are equipped with a wing package, and they're launched from fighter, really bombers like the Su-34, and they can glide roughly about 60 miles or so. It's kind of limited by physics.
Okay. So in terms of what they've been able to do so far, in terms of protecting their air from the Russian attacks, how important have the Patriot systems, the 4 systems that they've got, how important have they been? And to what degree do you expect them to be able to, as we talked about at the opening, triple essentially their defenses?
Well, that could certainly be a positive boon to their air defense. These systems, these Patriot systems, the ones they have now are capable of firing a type of missile called a PAC-3 missile. These are the most modern missiles that the U.S. has. They're designed to shoot down enemy planes, incoming warheads, and Ukraine has proven that they have been able to do this. They have been able to intercept incoming ballistic missiles. Now, the version that Israel has, it's called the PAC-2 GEM-T. Now, don't get too wrapped around the axle about that. The PAC-2 is still a very good missile, and it is designed to intercept incoming ballistic missiles, and it could theoretically hit one of these glide bombs. So going from 4 batteries to essentially what would be 12 batteries, that would be a major increase in capability, and Ukraine would be able to defend more of their airspace, specifically from these glide bombs, which have been deadly.
Was I somewhat in the ballpark when I mentioned the price tag per Patriot battery system?
Roughly, yes. So the PAC-3 missiles cost about $4 million each. GEM-2 might be a little bit different based on how many you're ordering, and the GEM-2 is still in production. The only issue with Ukraine receiving these launchers from Israel is that they might not be able to fire the PAC-3 missile, which is fine. It's not great. They can get upgrades. To fire the PAC-3, you need a hardware upgrade, several hardware upgrades, and some software upgrades. It's doable, but just getting the PAC-2 GEM-T to Ukraine would be a fantastic improvement for their security situation of their own airspace.
You've got a tremendous amount of knowledge about weapon systems. And so I don't want to keep it just limited to the Patriots. But since the start of this war, I know this may be a very sort of simplistic question, but since the start of Putin's invasion over 2 years ago, what has been the most important weapon system within the Ukrainian arsenal? What has given Putin's military the most difficulty?
That would probably be the HIMARS rocket system. This system has given Putin an incredible amount of agita. With this system, Ukraine is able to fire up to 6 missiles. These missiles are guided via GPS toward a target. They can fire at separate targets, and then they can move almost within about 2-3 minutes of firing. They can go to another place where there's already a pod of missiles set up, drop the other pod, drop a pod that was just fired, load the new pod in, and shoot again. It has been an incredible weapon system, and it has proven the concept of HIMARS, and by extension, the tracked version, which is the multiple launch rocket system.
For the HIMARS, what is the range on that?
I believe the range of the, I think it was the M61 that we gave them, I want to say that's about 60 or so miles. Roughly, they have different versions. We actually gave them a version that can't go as far as our most modern HIMARS missiles, and that was done because we didn't want them shooting into Russia. However, of course, that might change since we've allowed Russia to use ATACMS missiles, which is another feature. The HIMARS launcher can take one of those HIMARS pods, drop that off, and load an ATACMS pod. And that gives them an incredible amount of range with either a unitary warhead, meaning one single big warhead, or a cluster munition warhead, which is great for things like radar or airfields or other kinds of soft targets like troops.
Okay, how would you describe the logistics, in terms of efficiency, in terms of delivery of weapons to the Ukrainian military? Really, again, going back to the beginning of the invasion, I know there's a lot there on the playing field to talk about, but I'm curious to get your perception about how the U.S. and how the EU, how NATO has done in terms of supplying Ukraine with what they need in a timely fashion.
So we started out pretty good, being able to give Ukraine whatever they wanted for the most part. Javelin missiles, the Javelin essentially helped save Ukraine. Russians, they invaded in through Belarus. They slammed right into the Javelin missile, which is a smart weapon that once that soldier puts that crosshair on that tank, That thing fires and it goes and hits that tank. It doesn't care how small you are. It doesn't care if you fire off smoke. Doesn't care if you try to hide. That missile will go after you. So from a logistics standpoint, we did great. And then during this summer, or last summer, I should say, we had a lull because there were some problems in Congress. And eventually, the right side prevailed, and we managed to convince Congress that not only is this good for Ukraine, this is good for the United States. Missiles expire. Whenever we fire a Patriot, we're actually firing Patriots that are near the end of their service life because the fuel inside those missiles will actually expire. We have to send it back to Raytheon, and they have to cut it open and demill it, and it's hazardous waste. Well, now we can just send those things over to Ukraine. Ukraine can fire those older Patriot missiles, those older HIMARS rockets. We're saved on the disposal cost, and we get to use our money to purchase new weapons, which we were going to do anyway. So this is actually a win for everybody except the Russians, which is the whole idea.
Now, that's a really interesting point when you talk about sort of aging out of material. We've talked about on the PDB, we've talked about how Putin is trying to restock his warehouses with munitions. And obviously, North Korea has been playing a role in that. Could you talk a little bit about the reliability, the dependability of munitions coming from North Korea? What have we been seeing on the battlefield in terms of what they've been providing to Putin?
So I've actually taken a look at this. Russian soldiers have cut open some of the shell casings, at least for the 122 millimeter howitzers, and the explosives are not packed correctly. They're supposed to be in very tight bundles. That way they all explode uniformly, which gives that good gas pressure to push that shell outside the barrel. However, what we're seeing from some of the munitions coming from North Korea is you have stuff that's packed incorrectly. You have explosive charges in those shells that are missing a couple of strands of explosive, and that could do a couple of things. The first thing that could do is it could blow up your barrel, and that would be bad. Now, the second thing that could do is when you fire...
Okay, just for, if I could interrupt, just for our listeners then, blowing up the barrel, that's considered bad. I just wanted to, I wanted to make sure our listeners caught that. Okay.
That would be bad. That would be a suboptimal outcome for shooting a piece of artillery. It's supposed to explode on the other end. Now, when it comes to a second problem is you could have what's called a short round. And if you've ever been in the military, the term short round, it is absolutely terrifying. That is when someone didn't put enough propellant inside the breech of a weapon system or of an artillery system before they fired it. So you might have 6 rounds going to one place correctly where they're supposed to go and 1 round falling a little bit short, and it could fall on your own soldiers. So some of these systems some of the ammunition, I should say, that's coming from North Korea isn't packed correctly, and it's short the amount of propellant it needs to actually get those shells to a uniform distance. So it's certainly possible that when Russians fire these things, some could end up falling on their own people, which is not a desired outcome.
Right. Ryan, I could spend the rest of the day talking to you about this, and I want you to come back. We're going to take a quick break, so stay right there if you could. With just a very quick break, and then we'll continue this discussion with Ryan McBeth. If you're a listener to the PDB, and I hope that you are, you know that there's a lot going on in the world today, am I right? Authoritarian regimes on the march, wars overseas, political turmoil across the globe. Well, this is why now more than ever, you should support those on the right side of history. Look, Blackout Coffee is committed to your values, supporting constitutional rights and certainly those on the front lines, the troops, local law enforcement, and they honor all hardworking Americans. I'm proud to recommend Blackout Coffee. It is a great American coffee company, 100% committed to the American traditional values. From sourcing the beans to the roasting process, customer support and shipping, they've got an incredible work ethic, and they're dedicated to promoting your principles, and they accept no compromise on taste or quality. Check out blackoutcoffee.com/PDB and use coupon code PDB for 20% off your first order. Ditch those other guys. Seriously, just get rid of them. Blackout Coffee remains true to your values. That's blackoutcoffee.com/PDB or use coupon code PDB for 20% off your first order. As we say, be awake, not woke. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. We're again joined by Ryan McBeth. You can check him out on Substack at ryanmcbeth.substack.com. Ryan, thank you for sticking around. Really appreciate it. We were just talking about the reliability of munitions coming from North Korea to stock Putin's warehouses for his adventurism. What could you tell us about the condition of the Russian military production infrastructure? I mean, are they racing to stay ahead? Are they keeping up with their demands? Are the warehouses empty? Do they have the ability to build more infrastructure as this goes on? Because we're not seeing any indication from Putin anyway that he's getting out of this engagement.
So we are certainly seeing increased Russian production. Now, one of the issues with production, it's sort of like playing that game Axis and Allies. You have to kind of figure out where you're going to put your production costs. Do you want tanks? Do you want planes? Do you want artillery? And you have a limited amount of funding. If you want to kind of get technical, Russia has plenty of funding, but they have a limited amount of machine tools. And machine tools will eventually break. Now, a lot of Russian oil infrastructure is Western infrastructure. And there really is no Russian machine tool. There's really no Russian machine tool industry to create new machine tools when these old machine tools wear out and break. So now Russia is in this dilemma. You know, a problem has one or more solutions. A dilemma has two or more solutions, each of which are equally bad. And when you look at machine tools, you have to say, well, do I want to devote machine tools to trying to fix my oil infrastructure because I need to keep that running? Or do I devote machine tools to increasing production? Now, Russia has increased production. They're running more ships. They have enough workers to manufacture munitions. But as for creating new production lines, that's really going to be difficult because those new production lines need to be stocked with machine tools. And now Russia has to make a choice.
Let's talk about, if we could, just pivot just slightly, staying in the same battle space, but let's talk about drones. How important has drone technology been to both sides, both to Putin and to Zelensky and the Ukrainian military?
Drones are probably the major reason why both sides have trouble moving. The initiative was first given to Ukraine. Ukraine created a lot of drones, mainly because it needed to find a weapon system that it could use against Russia from a safe distance. For about 1 year, 18 months or so, Russia really didn't rely on drones, and now they're realizing how important they are. They've set up some of their own drone factories. They've also purchased some drones from other countries. Iran is one example. The Shahed drone is really more like a cruise missile. But Russia is using drones to a greater effect than they did at the start of the war. Now, one interesting thing is that because both sides have such incredible ISR, or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, it's really difficult for either side, Ukraine or Russia, to mass anything more than a company. Because once you mass that company, you have an incredible visual, thermal, and signal, meaning radio signature. So it is very difficult to mass enough troops for a breakthrough, because once you get over a company, which would be roughly 110 soldiers or perhaps 12 to 14 armored vehicles, you have this signature that can be spotted by a drone. And now artillery and rockets can be called in from the other side. So it's really hard for either side to make any kind of advance, and that's mainly due to drones.
Do the Russians, do they have their own drone manufacturing capability, or are they relying almost exclusively on Iran and outside providers?
So they have their own manufacturing capability. The Orlan 10 is a Russian drone. Russia also has some loitering munitions they've developed in-house, and they have their own Shahed drone factory, which was created with a license from Iran. So they do have their own drone-making capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Early on, we talked about the Patriot battery systems. Let's look on the other side, go to the offensive, and talk about the delivery of F-16s to the Ukrainian military. Where are we in that process? And to what degree do you imagine that to be, I don't know if we want to use the term game changer, but how would you describe it?
So the F-16 gives Ukraine 4 advanced capabilities that they really don't currently have. Now, as to where we are in the process, I know just last month, U.S. graduated, I believe, 12 graduates from a Air National Guard fighter school in Arizona. These guys are ready to go. They're just waiting on the equipment, and that equipment should be transferred perhaps in the summer. Now, the addition of these F-16s and these 4 capabilities are very, very important. Right now, Ukraine has maybe 78 or so combat-capable aircraft, and none of them have the range to counter Russia's anti-aircraft missiles. Russia flies combat air patrols with their fighters, and they have a special missile called the R-37, which has a range of about 120 miles, estimated, although Russia says it's more. Of course, they're going to say it has greater range. So right now, when a Ukrainian plane takes off, Russia just needs to light them up and fire a missile, and that plane has to head home. It has to go to ground because it will get shot out of the sky. However, with the addition of the F-16, capability 1 is the AMRAAM missile. This is a long-range air-to-air missile. It doesn't have the same exact range as the Russian R-37, but it closes that gap. It's either 60 miles or 110 miles, depending on the version of the AMRAAM that we send to Ukraine. So that evens the playing field a little bit. It will force Russia to pull back even more. The second capability is that the F-16 has integrated capability with the HARM anti-radiation missile. And an anti-radiation missile goes after radar the way a pig goes after truffles. So the F-16 can fly, and if it gets lit up by a surface-to-air missile radar from Russia, it can turn and it can fire that HARM, or high-speed anti-radiation missile, right down the beam of that Russian radar. And even if Russia turns that beam off, the missile remembers where it is. And that'll force Russia to move its surface-to-air missiles back even further. The third capability is the JDAM-ER, which is a glide bomb, kind of like those Russian glide bombs I've just been talking about. Now, what's kind of neat about these bombs is that they are GPS guided. One of the huge problems we've had with Russia is that they have GPS jammers, which degrade the capability of these glide bombs, these JDAM-ER glide bombs. But one thing the HARM can do is track there's home on jam. So if you have a GPS jammer that is giving out a signal, you can fire a HARM missile right down that jammer, and they have to turn it off or risk that thing being destroyed. And again, it remembers where you are. So once we start hitting those jammers, we'll be able to use the JDAM-ER to destroy Russian troop concentrations, command and control centers, supply dumps, and even assist in close air support on the front line. And the fourth thing is the Harpoon anti-ship missile, which will help destroy some of the cruise missile launching platforms that still remain in the Black Sea.
Ryan McBeth, this has been terrific. I would like to, see if you can come back. We've got plenty of other things to talk about here. I've got a ton of questions to talk to you about North Korea and their involvement and their relationship with Putin in terms of resources and provision of munitions. Cyber security, intelligence, weapons systems expert Ryan McBeth. You can check him out on Substack at ryanmcbeth.substack.com. He's all over YouTube. He's got about, 20 million followers on YouTube. It's insane. And that's only justified because this has been a great conversation. We really appreciate your expertise, Ryan.
Thank you so much for inviting me on, Mike. This has been a fantastic time.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll see you again, hopefully very soon. All right. The Biden administration, well, they're revealing plans to, get this, potentially collaborate with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And that would be to counter the rising threat of ISIS-K. It's complex. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, really, the Taliban, ISIS-K, they're at odds with each other? Well, yes, they are. This unprecedented move could see the U.S. and the Taliban sharing intelligence to combat a common enemy. Now, is it a common enemy? That implies that we've got common objectives and common concerns. I'm not quite sure that's the case. And for that reason, we have invited my good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. He'll be on here to talk about this very disturbing issue. Are you overwhelmed with back taxes or unfiled returns? Look, with 88,000 newly hired agents, that's 88,000 of them, the IRS has increased enforcement, issuing millions of pay-up notices in 2024. How pleasant does that sound, a pay-up notice? Don't face IRS collection tactics alone. Tax Network USA can help. As the nation's premier tax relief firm, they have negotiated over $1 billion, that's with a B, in tax relief for clients. Services include penalty forgiveness, hardship programs, and offer and compromise solutions. Now, whether you owe $10,000 or $10 million, you owe $10 million, their experts can assist. Behind on taxes? Well, they can guide you in catching up. Protect your financial security. Contact Tax Network USA for strategic advice on reducing or eliminating your tax debt. To schedule a complimentary consultation, call 1-800-245-6000 or visit tnusa.com. Don't let the IRS control your life. Empower yourself with Tax Networks USA's support and take charge of your financial future. Visit tnusa.com today. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Now, as the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It is an old saying. It's some attribute it to Socrates. Some people say Churchill came up with it. I'm going to take credit for it. I think I just made it up. So the Biden administration appears to be embracing that axiom, revealing this week that they're considering working with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan to combat the growing terror threat posed by ISIS-K. Now, the Taliban has no love for the group, which has wreaked havoc on the militant regime ever since they took control of Afghanistan following the disastrous U.S. withdrawal. You remember that in the summer of 2021. The U.S. is reportedly considering a cooperative agreement with the Taliban, where the U.S. would share intelligence regarding ISIS-K and the Taliban would feed us real-time intelligence about their regional operations. That's according to a report from NBC News. Now, ever since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, coupled with our waning influence in Africa, you like that word, waning? The U.S. has struggled to gather comprehensive intelligence about ISIS-K and other offshoots of the Islamic State. So much for the vaunted over-the-horizon capability. You remember that? The Biden administration talked about that incessantly during the withdrawal. Without a clear picture of their activities, U.S. options are limited regarding an intelligence partner in the region, that's to say the least. For more on this, I want to bring in my very good friend, the retired senior military intelligence officer, the esteemed, the one and only, I can't think of anything else to say about him, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. Tony, thanks very much for joining us, man.
And I got a shirt on today, too, so there you go. It's a bonus episode.
I know. I mean, for those who are wondering about the inside baseball, Tony was gracious enough to join the Situation Report, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. Seems like just yesterday,
Tony.
Ago. And he showed up wearing a T-shirt, which, so now I'm wearing a T-shirt because I thought, well, we'd look like, members of the same boy band. And he comes on wearing a shirt. So anyway, and a short sleeve shirt at that. That's a bold move right there.
That's bold.
All right, let's get talking Taliban. Let's talk ISIS-K.
Yeah.
What do you think about this report, Tony? Just anywhere you want to go with that conversation.
So, Mike, we had recognized before we left that ISIS-K was actually successful in taking over several provinces. This was when we were still on the ground there. By my count, there was about 5 provinces they had taken over, and there was a conflict between the Taliban. My belief was, since we were there, let the Taliban and ISIS-K just fight each other. And I think that would have been fine to keep them kind of at bay. And for the record, I was not for our leaving. I think we should have kept a intelligence and special operations force at Bagram to strike. This over-the-horizon stuff, Mike, it never works, especially in a country that's landlocked like Afghanistan. You have to have a presence. And I don't believe for the blood and treasure we invested, we should have ever left. We didn't leave Germany. We didn't leave South Korea. We didn't leave Japan. So I don't know why we decided this. But with that said, it's very clear at this point there's a conflict between those two radical elements. But my belief is it's not our job to jump in the middle of that. I'm going to say a word. You may not like it. And that word is Pakistan. The Pakistanis have been very close to the issue because they live there. We don't. And I have worked with the Pakistani ISI. I'm not always fond of them. I've had some pretty harsh words for them, but I think whatever we do, we have to do in conjunction with the Pakistanis and understanding what their interests are, because they're the ones we've worked with as a proxy. Heck, your former organization used to work very closely with them. So I'm not one saying we should try something different than what's worked in the past. And the past, we've worked with the ISI and the Pakistanis quite effectively.
Yeah, I think I would caveat that with my feeling that you always have to be careful with ISI. In terms of how they're playing, how they're playing the game. But I guess I'm of two minds here, Tony. I think if we were to approach it pragmatically, right, which typically the U.S. government doesn't, they approach it in sort of a fanciful way. And I know they're going to get tripped up over saying, well, we're going to have this cooperation with the Taliban, and in exchange, they're going to guarantee women's rights, and they're going to do, and civil liberties. We can't help ourselves sometimes as a government. If we just went at it pragmatically, right, and said, all right, it's an intelligence collection operation. I don't care. I don't trust the Taliban as far as you could throw them out the top of a 30-story tower. But if you say they've got some intelligence that we could use to degrade ISIS-K and other elements of ISIS, perhaps, without this fanciful concept that somehow we're getting into a relationship where suddenly our enemy becomes our friend, then I guess I don't have a problem with that. I just don't know that the U.S. government is capable of approaching it in that fashion, being very, very mercenary, because, that's how the Taliban will approach this.
Right. Well, we did use that approach for the initial entry. Remember, we worked with closely the Northern Alliance. It's in a book called 12 Strong. The movie's 12 Strong. Horse Soldiers is the name of the same book by Doug Stanton. And I know Doug. Doug's a great guy. He did a great job of researching that book. And we were very mercenary, if I can use that word, to work directly with tribes who were friendly to us. I'm not against us engaging tribes, Mike. I mean, when I was there running operations, we were using tribes. It's in my book, Operation Dark Heart. We talk about how we were using the tribes both as ground guides to get our combat forces against Hekmatyar and others that we were going after, as well as working with them, via them, to secure the provinces. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm just not sure if the Taliban is the right tribe. I mean, there are other tribes out there. And I mentioned the Northern Alliance. They were very close to us. They were very upset, really upset when we withdrew, and they were the last province to fall. By the way, Mike, if you remember when we left, when the Taliban went after everybody, they were the last ones to fall. They tried to hold out. So I'm not sure if they'd be willing to talk to us, but I'm all for the idea of working with tribes on the ground to get that real-time direct intelligence that we need to make assessments.
Yeah, I do agree with one of your earlier statements about the effectiveness of over-the-horizon capabilities. That became sort of a narrative, a talking point, kind of a little bit of theater for the Pentagon. I mean, God bless the Pentagon, right? But particularly for the White House, in trying to justify their complete withdrawal, saying, "No, this will be fine. This will be fine. We're gonna have this over-the-horizon capability, and that will allow us to be strategic in future potential operational strikes." Talk to me a little bit about that, if you could.
So I think I'm going to say something I think we will agree on. Without human intelligence, without clandestine boots on the ground, people like you and I running assets on the ground, you're not going to get the granularity you need to be effective in over the horizon. I'm not a fan of ISR, this whole thing of drones and satellites. I was told by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in a meeting I had with him, we've increased our ISR over the past 10 years by something like 2,000%, with only a 2% increase in actual intelligence. Think about the investment we've made in that, Mike. And people like you and me are trained to go out. We do those hard things of recruiting people. So my point is that unless you bring some level of us, case officers, back into it, able to go and recruit people to do things on the ground, like we did during, we actually did this during when we were going after the Soviets back during the day when, some of your colleagues, your seniors were out there doing all sorts of things like that. So I think that's the first thing we have to look at realistically. How can we reestablish effective clandestine human networks on the ground that will provide us that information?
Listen, Tony, stay right there. We've got to take
Sure.
a quick break, just long enough for you to mix up another cocktail. We'll be back with more with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. Just stay put. If you've been paying attention to the financial news, experts are beginning to express concern that the U.S. dollar may lose its status as the world standard. If you look around, the warning signs are there, starting with Saudi Arabia ending the petrodollar, which cemented the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Then Russia shocked the international markets and replaced the U.S. dollar with the Chinese yuan for all currency trade. BRICS is attracting countries moving away from the U.S. dollar as well. It's happening as we speak. The global de-dollarization trend is accelerating. Now, after the presidential debate the other day, the global stage now sees how vulnerable the U.S. really is. In times of uncertainty, gold is security. Gold remains a core asset to hold ahead of the U.S. election. Call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention PDB, and you'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has the no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver. And you may be eligible for the no-fee-for-life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 1-888-870-5457 for a free investor guide. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer for 7 years in a row. That's a lot of years in a row. Call 1-888-870-5457. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Let me bring back my good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. We've been talking Taliban, ISIS-K. Tony, thanks very much for sticking around.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. Let's bring it closer to home. We're talking about the threat that ISIS-K presents. To what degree can you talk about their potential for a terrorist event here in the U.S.?
So I do believe, going back to our previous conversation a couple seconds ago, that ISIS does legitimately hold a threat to the homeland. The Taliban, except for one instance, has not sought to actually hit the homeland. ISIS has. And I think the more we see ISIS resurging right now, and I was part of the team that advised Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Joe Dunford, with the buy, with, and through strategy to go right into Iraq and go into Syria to eliminate them. I don't think we've been paying attention sufficiently to what ISIS, ISIS-K, and other elements of ISIS are doing. So I think with the southwest border being wide open, the chances are very good that they already have operatives here. They're doing intelligence collection and looking for a target. You know, they're doing all the things that any organization that wants to strike the homeland would do. And they're just waiting for the right time to do something. So again, I think ISIS poses much more of a significant and real threat than the Taliban.
Yeah, and it is interesting, right? I mean, I know you know this better than just about anybody, but during the height of sort of the war on terror, right, our approach oftentimes was prepare for an attack that looked like the previous attack.
Right, exactly.
So back in the old days, yeah, we had truck bombs, right? So suddenly everything was barriers and bollards and you know, and so everything was kind of predicated on what happened previously. And I think what we've seen over time is that the next attack, and there will be one, right? It's like the pandemic. There will be another pandemic. It's just the way things work, unfortunately. But the next attack doesn't have to look like 9/11. It doesn't have to be as, if you want to use the word sophisticated, or as complex. We've seen from, the Moscow attack of ISIS-K on the Music Center, just how simple something can be and still wreak incredible havoc.
Well, I go back to the World Trade Center bombing, the first one, not with the airplanes. I mean, people on the ground with vehicles, or, I'm afraid actually of a bunch of folks with basic weapons going into a Home Depot and just killing people. That would be horrific. And obviously that would create a stir. I don't know, Mike, I don't know if you were in D.C. when they had the two assassins were going around shooting people at gas stations back about 2003.
Yeah.
That
the two dudes in the vehicle. Yeah.
Yeah. Two guys with a gun randomly killing people nearly shut down Washington, D.C. So to your point, and Christopher Wray has said this, that all the lights are blinking red. I take him at his word, and I think you're right. I think we should be looking at a different vector of attack regarding what they may do this next time. Yeah,
so I started to fade off, Tony, when you said the magical word shut down Washington, D.C. Well, there's a solution that could fix a lot of ills. No, but you're right. Yeah, that was a great analogy, because that was a fellow and a kid basically using a vehicle and paralyzing the entire region, not just Washington D.C.,
Literally.
Maryland, Virginia. It
Right.
just brought it to a halt. But so I think, and again, with the Music Center and with other incidents that we've seen, it doesn't have to be sophisticated. And the problem that we've talked about here on the PDB before is, and you've already just alluded to it, was the porous southern border. If you don't know who's crossing the border, and nobody should imagine somehow that the vetting process is solid. But if we don't
It's
know
not
who's
happening.
crossing the border, you can't guarantee national security.
No, you can't. Look, I've said I used to do what we call red teaming. I would put myself in the shoes or boots or sandals of a terrorist and try to figure out, if I were the bad guy, how would I do something? And I've said this on the record. I could shut down Congress with 10 guys with box cutters, if you just understand the centers of gravity and how to do things. And Mike, I'm not encouraging that. Please don't say this as I'm threatening. I'm just saying that I've looked at how certain facilities, certain organizations within our country are fundamentally vulnerable. And that's what worries me, is that they're going to do that reconnaissance that we're talking about, and they're going to hit us in a way that we may not fully anticipate. And that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, let's circle back to where we started with this idea that somehow the U.S. May start a cooperative agreement with the Taliban. Under the concept that we've got somewhat similar objectives. We'd like to see the destruction of ISIS-K. What would that look like in terms of command and control? Who would make that decision? I mean, outside of the White House, obviously it would have to be signed off on, but who would then have control of that? Is that more of a military, or is that more of an intel community exercise?
Title 10 or Title 50, Mike, I don't know. If it's Title 50, it'll be you all. The CIA would take the primacy in that. They would figure out a way to create liaison, probably either directly through Qatar, or we've had a relationship with the Taliban, or again with the ISI. I really see this at this point as much more of your problem, CIA's, than our problem, because that's really where it's going to have to go at this point. Just saying.
That's where we are in this world today. It used to be everybody was clamoring to take control of something. Now everybody's trying to push it off on somebody else. No, how about you guys over at the agency take that one? Wow. Hey, listen, Tony, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, thanks very much, man, for joining us today. I know we're going to have you back, and I can only hope that you dress better the next time.
I'm working on it, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's always fun. Thank you.
Okay. Talk to you soon, man. Take care. Well, that is all the time that we have for the PDB Situation Report. Listen, if you have any questions or comments or humorous anecdotes or jokes, just please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. We sincerely love hearing from you, and you've got some great questions and comments that we field, and then periodically every month we put them on what we call the Ask Me Anything episode, which is on PDB Premium. And to listen to the podcast of this show ad-free, now that I've just mentioned pdbpremium.com, become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief, and this is simple, by visiting pdbpremium.com. I'm Mike Baker. Until next time, you know the drill. Stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.